At this year's Shanghai Auto Show, for the first time ever, new German cars like the Volkswagen ID.7 and Mercedes Maybach EQS did not steal the show. The real stars of the show were innovative electric cars from Chinese brands such as the eye-catching BYD Yangwang U9 hypercar, the NIO ET7 with its swappable battery, and the incredibly affordable $11,000 BYD Seagull. This dominance of Chinese cars is quite surprising, as only 5 years ago German car manufacturers ruled both the global and Chinese car markets, while back then Chinese companies were only known for their somewhat crappy low-budget cars. But now, just 5 years later, China appears to have surpassed Germany's formidable car industry, becoming the world's second largest car exporter last year. Now, journalists quickly made the connection with statements like the following appearing in the Financial Times. China, already the world's biggest market for electric vehicles, is set to knock Japan from the top spot for global car export volume this year after overtaking Germany in 2022. So supposedly China is beating Germany thanks to its electric car miracle. But how exactly did this happen? Well, to answer that question, let's first ask ourselves, is China actually beating the German car industry thanks to the electronic vehicle revolution? Because there are two big problems with that narrative. The first is that the headlines about China becoming the world's second biggest car exporter focus on the number of cars sold. However, what car companies actually care about is revenue. The number of cars sold times the price of these cars. And while China sells more cars, Germany charges a higher average price. Therefore, when it comes to export revenue, Germany still holds the top spot, with China only ranking 12. The second problem with this narrative comes from connecting China's export numbers to its dominance in the electric vehicle sector. Because if you look at China's export numbers of electronic vehicles in more detail, you'll see that almost half of them are Teslas produced in China. Only 2% of exports are from innovative Chinese brands like BYD and NIO. The rest of export figures are from European brands like Polestar, MG and Volvo that are either owned or co-owned by the Chinese and therefore produce cars in China. What weakens this connection even further is that electric cars actually only accounted for about 16% of these Chinese export figures. Instead, most Chinese car exports were from established Chinese brands like SAIC and Chery, which export cheap cars with an internal combustion engine to emerging markets. And this is a segment that the German car manufacturers have abandoned on purpose, simply because these low-cost fuel cars aren't very profitable. So while the Chinese do now export more cars than the Germans, it doesn't have so much to do with these innovative electric cars. They mostly started exporting low-cost fuel cars that the German manufacturers aren't interested in exporting. And therefore, Germany can relax. China has not beaten the German car industry at all. Well, that's also not quite true, because as it turns out, the Chinese have actually beaten the Germans in the luxury car market, where it really counts. But before diving into that, let's talk about the benefits of being anywhere in the world virtually. The sponsor of today's video, Surfshark, allows users to change their virtual location, which has made it possible for me to watch specific geo-restricted content on streaming services. But even more essential, it allows people traveling to countries like China to access the full unrestricted internet they know and love from back home. Surfshark is a VPN that provides exceptional safety and privacy through military-grade encryption, effectively preventing criminals, private companies and governments from accessing your data and ensuring that prying eyes cannot see your activities or pinpoint your location, even when using public Wi-Fi. So no matter where you are, if you want to use the internet as it was intended, now's the time to sign up to Surfshark. using my promo code MONEYMACRO, which gets you an 83% discount, an extra 3 months for free, and quite uniquely, one single account can be used across unlimited devices. So make sure to try it out. They even offer you a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you have nothing to lose. But before that, let's get back into the Chinese car miracle. You see, just a few years ago, the Chinese car market was dominated by German brands such as Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes. For example, in 2020, foreign brands controlled roughly 64% of the Chinese car market, of which Volkswagen roughly had a third, making it the best-selling car brand there by far. But the flip side of this dominance was that German car makers also increasingly depended on China for their profits. For example, in 2020, Volkswagen reported that 40% of its profits were generated in China. But now, just 3 years later, some industry experts fear that Volkswagen might not even have a future in China. You see, while Volkswagen continues to dominate the fuel vehicle segment, the Chinese car market electrified at an unseen pace, from 5% of the market in 2018 to 26% today. And in the electronic vehicle market, the German car makers combined only have a 2.7% market share. Now, as a result, it's not surprising that BYD, which you may recall from the Shanghai Auto Show, recently surpassed Volkswagen as China's best-selling car brand. And indeed, if we look at the top 10 EVs sold in China in 2022, we can see that there's only one foreign car maker that is competitive in China, and that is Tesla. And that shift is already reflected in the market valuations of these companies. Looking at the world's largest car companies by value, 5 years ago, we can see that German car companies, along with Japan's Toyota, dominated the market. However, today, Chinese car manufacturer BYD is valued higher than many of the most prominent German companies. These valuations likely reflect that Chinese car makers, like BYD, are set to continue dominating the profitable Chinese market and may also dominate the world's second largest EV market, Europe, Germany's home turf. So yeah, perhaps it's not so crazy after all to say that the Chinese beat the German car makers in just 5 years. And so that brings us back to the main question of this video. How did China beat the German car industry in just 5 years? Well, to answer that question, I first need to give you an idea of why beating the German car industry was considered almost impossible. Sure, in the ideal competitive markets taught in economics classes, a country skilled at car production, like China, will inevitably break into the car market as long as all countries allow market forces to work. And yet, for years, while China's liberalization allowed its companies to master many industries, they just couldn't break into the global car market. Now, in my humble opinion, the reason for that is that there are two major market imperfections that shield the global car market from newcomers. The first is learning by doing, and in the car market it meant that because the German car makers had perfected the internal combustion engine through years and years of trying, doing and improving, it would take years for any new company to catch up. Now, the second imperfection is known as economies of scale, and with that, economists typically mean that as you scale up, you will be able to sell cars at a lower price. And this matters because in the car industry, there are really high fixed costs, such as research and development costs. So, for example, if Mercedes develops some new billion-dollar tech for its cars, it can spread those costs over the 500,000 cars that it typically sells, meaning that it might need to make its cars $2,000 more expensive. But if some Chinese startup that expects to sell 10,000 cars wants to do the same research, it needs to charge at least $100,000 extra for that car just to earn back its research costs. Indeed, Tesla CEO Elon Musk in an interview basically agreed with me that to make a compelling mass market car, two things are needed. First,
design iteration, going through multiple versions of something, and then the other is economies of scale. And you kind of need both of those things.
But while Musk overcame both these obstacles through clever marketing and attracting investments on a massive scale, The Chinese government took a very proactive approach instead of waiting for similar Musk-like entrepreneurs to emerge in China. So, to supercharge its entry into the imperfect global car market, China turned to one of the most controversial tools of economics: industrial policy, which Oxford professor Nathaniel Lane defines as political action meant to shift the industrial structures of an economy. So that is basically not letting the markets be the markets and actively intervening as a government. Now, according to this definition, China began using industrial policy when it initially opened its car industry to German car companies. To stimulate learning by doing, it required them to produce cars locally and always in collaboration with local Chinese entrepreneurs. What's more, the country forced these companies to transfer some technology to China. But while the country made some attempts to fund large car producers, it was actually never able to get sufficient economies of scale to compete on the global level. When it comes to the internal combustion engine, Chinese companies were just so far behind that the founder of WM Motor, Mr. Freeman Chen, said to The Economist in 2020, "You would have to invest billions of dollars for another 20 years and maybe then we would be getting closer to the Germans. It's hopeless." However, this is where China's Made in China 2025 policy initiative comes in, which focused on sectors in which China could leapfrog the competition. Now, the idea of leapfrogging is basically that while in many industries technologies move slowly and improve through learning by doing, every now and then a new technology comes along that renders all of that accumulated learning useless. And when that happens, a government push can allow firms in a developing nation to leapfrog foreign incumbents and to become the leader in a new technological era. So in 2015, under the Made in China 2025 umbrella, the country recognized that battery-powered electric vehicles are so different from internal combustion engine vehicles that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Chinese companies to leapfrog the competition and start learning by doing and building skill to get ahead. To facilitate this, China started encouraging both local demand and supply by providing massive loans, investments and subsidies to local EV manufacturing companies, and demand by subsidizing buyers, encouraging the development of local charging infrastructure, and by forcing local governments to buy electronic vehicles. Now, this allowed Chinese producers to get a running start, getting lots of experience by making EVs and developing scale fast. And sure, while Germany tried to encourage the transition to electronic vehicles as well, it did so on a far smaller scale. Even worse, the German government focused much of its industrial policy on protecting its fuel car makers from change. For example, when it helped them to pretend diesel cars were efficient during Dieselgate, and now by blocking the EU's efforts to ban CO2 emitting cars. And so, although China may not have outperformed Germany's car industry in terms of revenue yet, it has beaten the German car makers where it really hurts, in the electronic vehicle segment in China. And this allowed Chinese car makers to leapfrog the German competition, getting ahead of them when it comes to learning by doing and economies of scale in this new EV era. And this advantage now even enables Chinese car makers to pose a threat to the German car makers in their home region, Europe. But, okay, yeah, let's see how that will go, because while the Germans are now behind a bit, they are also firmly on board the EV train, and luckily for them, there are some other barriers to entry in the European car market, like brand power and establishing a distribution network. What's more, I think it needs to be said here that while the Made in China 2025 initiative was really successful for cars, the country also threw a lot of money at sectors such as AI, aerospace and microchips without similar success. But still, partially thanks to these Chinese success stories, countries like the USA and even Germany are now more and more messing with markets through industrial policy. To stay informed about these and other global economic developments from an economist perspective, consider subscribing to Money and Macro, or if you've been watching a lot of my content lately, consider supporting my independent research on Patreon or by becoming a member of this channel on YouTube. Oh, and if you want to know more about the rise of Chinese EVs, check out this video from the excellent Asianomics channel over here. Or if you're interested in a video about another German-speaking state that got entangled with a big business, check out this video over here about the rise and fall of Credit Suisse.